I would love for you to talk a little bit about the cultural differences between working in a big four versus a technology forward organization, like a Rally Health, for example.
Yes, it was a huge culture shock, to be honest with you. The biggest difference is how dynamic that SaaS environment is, especially in the earlier stages. These bigger companies just move more slowly, and you have your lane, right? And you're supposed to kind of stay in your lane. Which has its advantages, just you're not worrying about much else, but it's also frustrating because, especially in security, where you need everyone else to cooperate and you bump into problems in other areas that you don't have a chance to help resolve. Not in a startup. Like, no one will ever tell you that you can't go help solve a problem somewhere else, right? So it's also an amazing place to broaden your experience.
So, Marcia, thank you for joining the Hampton Hangout here. For everybody listening, we are going to talk about a little bit of Marcia's background into being a CISO at different SaaS companies, some of the challenges, the day in the life. So I'd like to kick it off with a quick intro of me. I'm the principal recruiter here at Hampton North and pretty much worked everything from your individual contributor roles all the way up through to your executive searches. And I'd like to have Marcia introduce herself here to give you a little context into her background.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me here for sure. And I think you were a little bit too humble there, Ross. I've enjoyed working with you in the past, and I think you are a great recruiter, especially because you understand this role. I think probably most of my colleagues hearing this would agree that these searches are difficult, and most of the time we're talking with folks that don't really understand what it should look like. So whenever I work with you, it's a lot easier because of that. So you're very good at what you do.
I really appreciate that. And, for those that don't know, Marcia was a client of mine actually at one point. While I do represent her in the job search, we worked together while she was at Rally Health. I mean, Marcia, why don't you kind of get into just like the overall day in the life of a CISO working for an early stage SaaS company?
Yeah, absolutely. So just trying to do a quick background here on, on why I'm talking about this. And I started actually as a software engineer. So coming back later in my career, and it was after I was an engineer for about 7-8 years before I switched to security. I never wanted to be just a coder. What I loved about security is how much of business and people really are involved, much more than technology in a lot of ways. But it gave me kind of this technical background, right, that really helps me in the role. And then later on, coming back to be the security leader at SaaS companies, and software product companies, felt like a coming back home and kind of putting those two worlds together of being a former engineer and being a security professional. So that's been a lot of fun. Before that, I was in consulting in this area with KPMG, and then also worked in other security teams and learned until I was able to get my first kind of head of security CISO role at Rally a few years ago, and have done that now a couple of times.
I mean, I would love for you to talk a little bit about the cultural differences between working in a big four suit and tie type shop, right? Versus a technology forward organization, like a Rally Health, for example.
Yes, it was a huge culture shock, to be honest with you. But I fell in love with it because I think the biggest difference is how dynamic that SaaS environment is, especially in the earlier stages. Not like super. I haven't done super early startup, but still kind of that mid-size, 500, 1,200 kind of deal. Not like these humongous companies I owned before, like KPMG and Verizon. And it just moves, these bigger companies just move more slowly, and you have your lane, right? And you're supposed to kind of stay in your lane, which has its advantages, right?
Sure.
Because you're not worrying about much else, but it's also frustrating because you bump, especially in security, where you need everyone else to cooperate and you bump into problems in other areas that you don't have a chance to help resolve. Not in a startup. Like, there's not, no one will ever tell you that you can't go help solve a problem somewhere else, right? So it's also an amazing place to broaden your experience, right? You're working on different problems. Like, I've helped solve budget process problems, right? Because being a security professional, you get very good at processes.
Mhm.
And I've helped others with other processes. So it's I love that collaborative and kind of dynamic environment.
Yeah, I mean, it encourages you to be quite versatile, get you out of your comfort zone a little bit as well, right? I'm sure there's a ton of different areas that you probably would have to, you know, kind of jump in and help pick up the slack for if there's a certain area, that's lagging a little bit. But as
Yeah.
far as, the environment goes, we talked about, um, some of the importance of risk prioritization, building relationships with engineering functions. Like, talk me through more of the type of dynamic that you'll have with the different teams in a startup. Um, if you want to kind of take it from there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are key things for you to be successful in that environment, right? I think it's I don't know if I have coined this term. I know that I haven't heard it from somewhere else, or maybe it's in the background. But I like to say you have to practice radical prioritization, really, when you're in that environment, because um, there are just not enough resources to go around. And it's not just what is directly invested in security, right? As security professionals, we can't really do anything that doesn't involve asking somebody else to also do something, right? That takes time out of their day, takes resources, right? Definitely an engineering team that stays on top of their cloud vulnerabilities, for example, it probably requires more engineers than one that wouldn't, right? So you are asking for more resources, and these are a lot of times hard to come by. So you have to be very thoughtful about your asks and just be prepared that you're going to be prioritizing not between medium and high, or medium, or sometimes even highs and criticals. You're going to be prioritizing between critical things that you
Yeah.
have to pick, and that's why I like to call it radical prioritization.
Yeah.
Um,
And I'm sure that there's been some clashes with the engineering folks, right? Like, have you been in a situation where you're trying to implement something that maybe inhibits their work a little bit or slows them down and they get frustrated? Um, I'm sure that's happened a lot, but like, is there any specific examples you can think of? Obviously, without naming names, right?
yeah.
Anything that you can talk about and how you've kind of amended that, that situation, that relationship?
Yeah, absolutely. No, you have to be best friends with engineering, right?
Yeah.
That's a big piece of, a CISO role and success in a SaaS company is being able to build security into the product. So that's mostly engineering, you know. And I found that it's very useful, like before, because you're talking about getting to a head, and I'll talk about a couple of examples of that, sort of getting to that conflict piece.
Mm.
Um, but before that, to help you in those moments, it's very important, again, to be thoughtful about what you're asking for. And I find whenever I get into a new environment, there is always something you can actually remove. There's always a burden that you can remove. There's something that they're doing that, like, they're probably, putting too much time into it, versus the security value we're getting out of it. So you can change it. So with engineering, I have, for example, unplugged a cloud security posture management tool that was just creating a lot of noise, and getting in the way for them and not being really helpful, because we had kind of this um, problem that comes before that, which is being able to clean up the environment and categorize the environment, right? For if you're coming up with a lot of vulnerabilities on repos for infrastructure resources that are not being used anymore, for example, or code that's not being used anymore, that is just junk clogging up, right? What's coming out of your findings. So I was like, let us focus a little bit on cleaning that up and turn this off. So
Mm.
another, actually simple example that I'm surprised when I talk to colleagues that have not been able to implement this, is something that doesn't give something kind of an annoyance back to just engineering, but the whole company, which is getting rid of password expiration.
Mm.
This is still a tricky one, even though I think NIST has had this out for, I don't know, 15 years. It's ridiculous. I was so stuck on that. So just, having people not have to change their passwords, especially privileged passwords that engineering has every quarter. I mean, that's a long password and sometimes kind of a pain to change. It is like a small thing that you can give back to them. So looking for something to give back, right, to remove burden, it buys you more credibility, because when we come up with an ask, they
Yeah.
know, like, you're being thoughtful about it, right?
I'll
Because
be
you
more
know
inclined to, collaborate on it. Yeah.
exactly. So I think preemptively doing that. But I have, um, you're always though still coming up when you have to make an ask of
Mhm.
engineering. They are short staffed. I mean, I've never been in
Yeah.
a
That was the
environment.
question I was going to ask you. Like when you've joined these startups, like what has been the security to engineering ratio, would you say?
Oh God. The interesting thing is that at Rally, I had a better ratio,
Mhm.
because we had a team of 30,
Okay.
how big was the engineering team? Oof,
So you think it was more,
I think a
more
couple of hundreds.
100?
Yeah, I think it was a couple of hundreds at least. And then
Wow.
at Upside though, it was much smaller. We had 10 people in security, and over 100 engineers. So I've kind of encountered the same problems in both. I'm not sure that, and I've been asked this question, I'm not sure that that ratio really um, is key for success.
Mhm.
One thing that worked really well, though, is just how you use those resources. So the best way to have been able to implement this is using, from your application security kind of pillar, right?
Mhm.
Actually using an embedded model of having security engineers embedded with key engineering teams.
Right.
It was so interesting because I think part of that conflict that you can have with engineering is that you're coming from the outside. You don't really understand the code and kind of the technical challenges that they have day to day, right? I mean, we have an idea,
Yeah.
uh, but we don't live it, right? When you put somebody in there that actually can truly speak their language, these are engineers, and I love when
Yeah.
we're able to convert engineers into
Like
security.
software engineers turn security at some point. Yeah.
Those are the best. Like, if I can give one piece of advice for CISOs at SaaScom, have at least one of those. Doesn't matter
Yeah.
how big your team is, have one of those, because they're able to go there and actually understand. And again, it can help you cut the kind of the BS a little bit when they tell you they can't do something for a technical reason. You have
Right.
someone who actually understands, but it's way bigger than that, because once they understand their code and their challenges specifically, we can weed out so much in terms of white noise and false positives of things that we would have come to a clash before,
Yeah.
pushing them to resolve, pushing them to spend time on, where we are actually misunderstanding the risk because we don't
Mhm.
understand the technical details and kind of the feasibility of the whole thing. So it's extremely powerful, right? Coming from kind of that bottom up
Mhm.
with engineering, you having engineering, the engineers and your security engineers collaborate very closely. So you come bottom up from that technical piece, and then top down, working with engineering leadership and show them that you are prioritizing very carefully. Like one of the levers that I have pulled, for example, we can typically do this because security is layered. You can balance proactive control, like how much you're spending on, I don't know, resolving vulnerabilities, right, to prevent something bad from happening, and how much you're monitoring for indicators that, hey, maybe something is being exploited. So I have pulled this lever on, like, for example, when we were at crucial times where engineering did not have time to spare on resolving, vulnerabilities at the rate that, we knew we really had to. You
Mhm.
can then crank up on monitoring, right? If you understand the risk, if you understand the assets that carry most of the risk, be it because of the data they carry or because of availability issues, which is a huge, problem for SaaS companies.
Yeah.
You can focus your monitoring attention there and relieve that pressure on them when they need it, right? To get through a shortage when they have to get a product out and don't have enough people to do it.
Yeah.
So, and that really shows that you're a team player too, right? That you are collaborating with them. And like, my goal is not different from the CTO goal, right? I want us to ship product. I'm just here to help us ship it in a more sustainable way, right? In a way
Yeah.
that's secure.
Yeah.
But show that you're a true partner in that way by, pulling these different levers and changing things.
Yeah. And I'd say like, when I worked at my last company, I did a lot less executive searches, but now it's a major component of the types of roles that we're recruiting on, and while it's done on a confidential basis, but a lot of these things like that the executives are looking for is that communication piece, right? It's not just can you talk technical to your team, right? You need to be able to bridge the gaps across different pillars of the organization. Um, can you communicate, like you said, speak the language of the engineers, but also can you communicate that language and translate it to, for non-technical people, across the different pillars. So it is an incredibly important skill set to have, and not just at an executive level, top down, right? But that kind of brings us into the reporting structure aspect. I mean, sure, you've had a few different scenarios of who you're reporting into or what levels and different job titles. From what I've seen a lot, SaaS world tends to be somebody in engineering that leads security. What has worked for you in the past? Give us some of your experiences, and what do you think moving forward the industry should look to maybe restructure their businesses? Maybe if it's out of engineering, for example.
Right. Yeah. For the most part, I have reported, either directly to the CTO or kind of through that engineering organization. I think that is the most common. I have been in an environment where we reported to the CFO as well, right? And I'm seeing a lot now actually reporting to general counsel, the executive for the legal team, and find that very interesting. So I think that it is natural, especially for a SaaS company in the earlier stages, to have security report to the CTO. And I think whether or not this is the better like strategic move, it just kind of happens because the leadership team is like, okay, just you're the only one who maybe can halfway understand what she's saying, right?
Yeah.
So honestly, that's typically why they think, okay, you're the technical person, you deal with security. It just ends up being that way. I'm not sure if it's necessarily, like I said, the most strategic way, but I think during the stages that your biggest focus is the product, this actually might make sense. And if we're able to strike, as I have actually been lucky with the CTOs I've worked with, really strike that balance, right? Because there is a little bit of kind of a segregation of duties problem there. It's the same problem of, before and in other companies that are not SaaS, reporting to the CIO, right? So it's the same deal. So there's got to be really good communication. And the best way to do this is to create a kind of dotted line where the CISO has an opportunity to report outside of the CTO, right? Have the CISO come report to the senior exec team or the board, right? Even at an earlier stage, right? I really encourage this because you want to give security a little bit more of an independent voice. And it doesn't mean that you're going to do everything that security is recommending, right? But just that you are listening, right? That you are understanding the risks that you are accepting. Even I think I always say, like, I'm a team player. I'm here to enable the business. But if we're going to accept a big risk, all I ask is that we do that with our eyes open. That's all. And I think, again, creating that voice for the CISO, even at the earlier stages, I think it's really important reporting to CISO.
And in that sense, I mean, how often were you able to get board representation or, I guess, board exposure while you're in that reporting line? You understand what I'm saying? Like, I feel like you're in those cases, it's beneficial for you to be able to directly communicate those things, right? Versus an engineering leader who may be covering for themselves on some screw ups, right? You know what I mean? On some risk exposure. So that's something about, if I were somebody in your position, right? So talk to me about the board level.
Unfortunately, I've not had as much opportunity as I think I should have. It's been sporadic, if you will, right? So they have a big meeting and I get to come in for a couple of minutes, but periodically, right, I've been more preparing the materials that then the CTO, etc., will present to the board. So there's a little bit of that translation going on. And again, that's those are the cases that has been more frustrating to feel like you have a voice. So again, I really do recommend, and I think from the board's perspective, right? Okay, most of these companies, we're talking about private equity.
Yeah.
You don't have the SEC that says you have to have this SEC report to
Yeah.
the board. But there's a reason for that, right? You are, if you're representing investors and what's best for the company, you want to hear that voice. It's straight from
Mhm.
the horse's mouth, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
It's really what I would encourage. And I think there is an opening, right? I'm seeing that more and a little bit more frequent, but it should be the role, and something that I hope will become more of the role.
Yeah. And that kind of brings us to some more of the challenges, right? Like that seems to be a major one for a lot of folks in your position. But is there anything else that you'd like to talk about as far as challenges and, the dynamics of a ever so changing startup and different rounds of investments and things of that nature, right? As it scales. Um, Talk to us about some of the challenges.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I love it. I still love it. There are a lot of great things of that dynamic environment, the learning, the excitement, the ability to get things done fast. But it's also can be a double-edged sword, right? It is um, it's an environment that has a lot of instability, and it's a high stress environment also. I think you have to be prepared for priorities to change several times a week.
Yeah.
It's incredible. And I think working really closely with your team to make sure that you're communicating very clearly, because communicating priorities, just
Yeah.
keeping up with the priorities that are changing above and around you, it's really hard. Making sure that you're communicating that fast enough with your team and managing that frustration, right, of having to switch. But that is the life. That is the life. And it's interesting because I still recommend a 1-year roadmap.
Yeah.
It may sound odd, like do not spend like 3 months writing, do not write like a really, detailed plan of
No
what you're going
plan,
to
right?
do. Right. But have an idea, because, I love that saying. This is so true in a startup world. If you want to make God laugh, make a plan. I think that, yeah, I think it's very true in a
I
startup.
was just thinking that. Yeah.
Right. But
Mm.
if you have a plan, you have a place to switch from, right?
Yeah.
Have a direction, start walking in a direction, because in that environment where things are changing, you may easily just be completely directionless. Okay, this week we're doing this, that week we're doing that. But if you have a place you're going, it's actually easier to switch direction if you've been through the thought process, and you have something to get back to, right? Those long-term goals you should still have in the back of your mind. So that's the balance, and I think, honestly, also we said the financial uncertainty. I have experienced layoffs, and I think that more often than I would like. And honestly, for CISOs that want to be in this environment, you have to be prepared for that.
Yeah.
Savings, like be prepared for a 9-month search.
Mhm.
You have to. And because when layoffs come around, I mean, if you're going to
Kind of out
pay
of your hands.
executive,
It's out of your hands at that point.
out of your hands.
And it
And
sounds like it could be for a variety of different reasons, not just economic conditions in the marketplace. Like from what I've seen, if your company's gearing up to go public, right, they might want to bring a new CISO in for that, somebody that's been there before, right? So
it's
it
true.
just could depend on company strategy at the end of the day. It may have nothing to do with your abilities.
Okay.
Um, it's just sometimes totally out of your hands, unfortunately.
Yep.
Um,
100%.
so I mean, what with all that being said, I mean, I'm sure you've walked into some absolute messes in your day, right? You walk in and you know, there's no security in place at all, and you're building from scratch. But I'm sure that you've also had situations where there has been some sort of foundation and they're trying to do the right things, and there's maybe some box checking going on. But that kind of brings me to the last question here: is when is it the best time for a company to hire a CISO, and is it really ever too early?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think a company has to be thoughtful about when to bring a CISO in, because again, it's very painful if you change your mind later. And quite honestly, not every company, not every SaaS company, depending on the stage, needs a strategic leader in security. I'm biased to the opposite, right? I want more opportunities, but the reality of business, I would say that. What I would say though is even from the very beginning, what I see companies doing is, most companies will have to answer to some kind of compliance requirement, right? Even just contracts require you to have something in place. So they tend to have their first hire be compliance. And I love compliance. I grew up in compliance for,
Mm-hmm.
my career, but um, what I would also not forget, you're not going to regret making this investment. It's never too early to invest in a good security engineer as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I would trade that. I would actually advise a company and talk myself out of a job if you're too early to have a strategic leader, have a security engineer, because for example, authentication is something that I can't understand why we get so wrong from the beginning. And it's so hard to turn that around later.
Mm-hmm.
It is so hard. It's so embedded, and it creates customer friction, user friction. It's awful. If you have somebody who understands how to put that in your app in the beginning, that's going to be great. And also creating patterns from the beginning, it's the best way to shift left security. When you get into a very messy cloud environment that was built, by the founders who didn't sleep for 6 months, right, on their backyard, like, right? No, these are desperate things. You walk into a mess. No one is thinking about patterns that will enable security, right? Get somebody who understands that in there as early as possible. But don't wait too long to have a strategic leader, right? I think if you have a lot of compliance and regulatory needs, it is best to have a strategic leader, not just a compliance analyst that can help you with that, because you can overinvest and you can also miss opportunities to negotiate on these compliance requirements. A lot of people don't know there's a lot of room to negotiate. There is. Just to make sure you're not overinvesting. So it can be very helpful. If you plan for your growth to be through M&As, it could be very helpful to have a strategic leader in that area. And obviously, when you get to a point that you're preparing for an exit, do not think that you can prepare for an exit in 6 months.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? I mean, you're going to need to grow up your processes, right? You're going to need to demonstrate governance from that security piece. You need somebody with a strategic eye to be able to put that in place. It's not going to be in 6 months, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think there is a too early where I think you should have a security engineer and a compliance analyst is what I would do.
Right.
And then, a leader, somebody to be able to lead them, but also don't wait too long to get that strategic leader there.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Well, that about wraps us up. Is there anything else that you wanted to, I don't know, maybe say any advice that you can give to first CISOs at SaaS companies? They were the founding engineer, then they ended up getting the founding security engineer and ended up getting promoted to the big seat. Or companies out there that don't have a CISO yet, or whatever. Any sort of advice that you'd like to give?
Yeah, I think we covered most of it, but I would say, we talked about a lot of the challenges, and I would say though that I still love it and I recommend it. It's just not for the faint of heart, right? But if you are that person who really loves a challenge, just be prepared for the ride, and it is a great place to grow in your career as well. And remember that collaboration is key, right? So you're talking about that first CISO coming into a SaaS company. Listen first. Listen first, understand, and so that you can make good asks. Every time you make an ask that's not good, which means much more effort, for example, than the security value that it brings, you're going to lose so much credibility that's going to haunt you later, right?
Yeah.
And the best way to do that is to listen first and create those relationships.
Amazing. Well, Marcia, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yes, of course. Thank you.